Okay, you're back. We just finished chapter 4. Do you remember what happened in chapter 4? Prince Caspian was taken up to the tallest tower in the building by his new tutor because his nurse got fired, if you remember. And Dr. Cornelius, his new tutor, took him up so nobody could hear them, and they were talking about the old Narnia, where there was talking animals and trees and the old kings and queens of Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy used to reign the country, the land. So now we're going to start chapter 5, Caspian's Adventures in the Mountains. After this, Caspian and his tutor had many more secret conversations on the top of the great tower, and at each conversation Caspian learned more about old Narnia, so that thinking and dreaming about the old days and longing that they might come back filled nearly all of his spare hours. But of course, he didn't have many spare hours to spare, for now his education was beginning in earnest. He learned sword fighting and riding, swimming and diving, how to shoot with a bow and arrow, how to play on the recorder and the theorbo, how to hunt the stag, which is what they call deer in England, and then how to cut the deer up when he was dead. He also learned about cosmography, rhetoric, heraldry, versification, and of course, history, with a little bit of law, physics, alchemy, and astronomy. Now, of magic, he only learned the theory behind it, for Dr. Cornelius said that the practical part was not a proper study for princes. And I myself, he added, am only a very imperfect magician and can only do the most small experiments. Of navigation, which is a noble and heroic art, said the doctor, he was taught nothing, because King Miraz disapproved of ships and the sea. He also learned a great deal by using his own eyes and ears. As a little boy, he'd often wondered why he disliked his aunt, Queen Prunaprismia. He now saw that it was because she disliked him. He also began to see that Narnia was an unhappy country. The taxes were high, the laws were stern, and King Miraz was a cruel man. After some years, there came a time when the queen seemed to be ill, and there was a great deal of bustle and pother about her in the castle, and doctors came, and the courtiers whispered. Now, this was in early summertime. At one night, while all this fuss was going on, Caspian was unexpectedly wakened by Dr. Cornelius after he'd only been a few hours in bed. "Are we going to do some astronomy?" asked Caspian. "Hush," said the doctor. "Trust me and do exactly as I tell you. Put on all your clothes. You have a long journey ahead of you." Caspian was very surprised, but he'd learned to have confidence in his tutor, and he began doing what he was told at once. When he was dressed, the doctor said, "I have a wallet for you. We must go into the next room and fill it with food from your Highness's supper table." In those days, they called a wallet almost like a bag or a purse of some sort, and so they're going to fill it with food. "My gentlemen in waiting will be there," said Caspian. "They are fast asleep, and they won't wake up," said the doctor. "As I told you, I am a very minor magician, but I can at least contrive a charmed sleep." So they went into the antechamber, and there, sure enough, the two gentlemen in waiting were sprawling on chairs and snoring hard. Dr. Cornelius quickly cut up the remains of a cold chicken and some slices of deer meat and put them with bread and an apple or so and a little flask of good wine into the purse, the wallet, the bag, which he then gave to Caspian. It fitted onto Caspian by a strap over Caspian's shoulder, like a satchel you would use for taking books to school. "Do you have your sword?" asked the doctor. "Yes," said Caspian. "Then put this mantle over all of you to hide the sword and the wallet." "That's right. And now we must go to the great tower, and we have to have a talk." When they reached the top of the tower, it was a cloudy night, not at all like the night when they had seen the conjunction of the two planets Tarva and Alambel. Dr. Cornelius said, "Dear Prince, you must leave this castle at once and go to seek your fortune in the wide world. Your life isn't safe here. You're in danger. Why? Asked Caspian. Because you are the true king of Narnia, Caspian the 10th, and you are the true son and heir of Caspian the 9th. Long life to your majesty. And suddenly, to Caspian's great surprise, the little man dropped down on one knee and kissed Prince Caspian's hand. What does all this mean? I don't understand, said Caspian. Well, I wonder you've never asked me before, said the doctor. Why, being the son of King Caspian, you are not King Caspian yourself. Everyone except your majesty knows that Miraz is a usurper. It means he doesn't belong as the king. He's not the true king. When he first began to rule the country, he did not even pretend to be the king. He called himself Lord Protector. But then your royal mother died, the good queen, and the only Telmarine who was ever kind to me. And then one by one, all the great lords who had known your father died or disappeared. And not by accident either. Miraz weeded them out. Belisar and Euvolus were shot with arrows on a hunting party. By chance, it was pretended, by accident, but all the great house of the Passerids he sent to fight giants on the northern frontier, till one by one they all fell. Arlian and Erimon and a dozen more he executed for treason on false charges. The 2 brothers of Beaver's Dam he shut up as madmen, and finally he persuaded the 7 noble lords, who alone among all the Telmarines did not fear the sea. He persuaded them to sail away and look for new lands beyond the Eastern Ocean, and as he intended, they never came back. And when there was no one left who could speak a word for you, then his flatterers, as he had instructed them, begged him to become king, and of course he did. Do you mean, asked Caspian, that he wants to kill me now? That is almost certain, said Dr. Cornelius. But why now, said Caspian. I mean, why didn't he do it a long time ago if he wanted to? And what harm have I done to him now to make him angry? He has changed his mind about you because of something that happened only 2 hours ago. The queen has given birth to a son. Well, I don't see what that's got to do with it, said Caspian. You don't see, exclaimed the doctor. Have all my lessons in history and politics taught you no more than that? Listen, as long as he had no children of his own, he was willing enough that you should be the king after he died. Now, he might not have cared much about you, but he would rather you have the throne than a stranger that he didn't know. But now that he has a son of his own, he will want his own son to be the next king. You are now in the way. He'll clear you out of the way for sure. Well, is he really as bad as that, said Caspian. Would he really murder me? He murdered your father, said Dr. Cornelius. Well, that made Caspian feel very strange, but he said nothing. I'll tell you the whole story, said the doctor, but not now. Right now there's no time. You must leave at once. You'll come with me, though, said Caspian. Well, I dare not do that, said the doctor. It'd make your danger even greater. 2 of us are more easily tracked than 1. Dear Prince, dear King Caspian, you must be very brave. You must go alone at once. Now try to get across the southern border to the court of King Nain of Archenland. He'll be good to you. Well, will I never see you again? Asked Caspian in a quavering voice. I do hope so, dear king, said the doctor. What friend have I in the world, in the whole wide world, except for you, your majesty? And I have a little magic, but in the meantime, your speed is the key. Here are 2 gifts before you go. This here is a little purse of gold. Alas, all the treasures in this castle should be yours by rights, but they're not yours yet. And here is something far better. He put in Caspian's hands something which he could hardly see, but which he knew by the feel to be a horn that you put to your lips and blow notes out of. That, said Dr. Cornelius, is the greatest and most sacred treasure of Narnia. Many terrors I endured, many spells did I utter to find it when I was still young. Do you know what it is? It is the magic horn of Queen Susan herself, which she left behind her when she vanished from Narnia at the end of the Golden Age. It is said that whoever blows this horn shall have strange help come and help them. And no one can say exactly how strange, but it will come. It may even have the power to call Queen Lucy and King Edmund and Queen Susan and the High King Peter back from the past, and they will set everything to rights. It might be that it'll call up Aslan himself. But take it, King Caspian. Do not use it except at your greatest need. And now haste, haste, haste. The little door at the very bottom of the tower, the door into the garden, I have it left unlocked. But there we must part. Well, can't I get my horse, Destrier? Said Caspian. Your horse is already saddled and waiting for you just at the corner of the orchard. So during the long climb down the winding staircase, Cornelius whispered many more words of direction and advice to Prince Caspian. Caspian's heart was sinking, but he tried to take it all in. Then came the fresh air in the garden, a fervent, firm hand clasp when they shook hands with him and the doctor. Then he ran across the lawn, a welcoming whinny from his horse Destrier, and so King Caspian X left the castle of his fathers. Looking back, he saw fireworks going up to celebrate the birth of the new prince. All night long he rode south, choosing byways and bridle paths through woods. As long as he was in country that he knew how to get out of there, but afterwards he kept to the high road. Destrier was as excited as his master at this unusual journey, and Caspian, although tears had come into his eyes at saying goodbye to Dr. Cornelius, he now felt brave and in a way happy to think that he was the king, King Caspian, riding to seek adventures with his sword on his left hip and Queen Susan's magic horn on his right. But when daybreak came with a sprinkle of rain, and he looked around him and saw on every side of him unknown woods, wild heaths, and blue mountains, he started to think how large and strange the world was, and he started to feel a little frightened and small. As soon as it was full daylight, he left the road and found an open, grassy place in the middle of some woods where he could rest. He took off Destrier's bridle and let him graze. He ate some cold chicken and drank a little wine, and pretty soon he fell asleep. It was late afternoon when he woke up. He ate another little bit, a morsel, and continued his journey still southward by many unfrequented lanes. That means not many people traveled on them. Still going southward, he was now in a land of hills going up and down and up and down, but always more up than down. From every ridge, he could see the mountains growing bigger and blacker ahead of him. As the evening closed in again on the second day, he was riding their lower slopes. The wind started to get stronger. Soon rain fell in torrents on him. Destrier, his horse, became uneasy. There was thunder in the air, and now they entered a dark and seemingly endless pine forest, and all the stories Caspian had ever heard of trees being unfriendly to man started to crowd into his mind, and he's looking around himself a little bit afraid. He remembered that he was, after all, a Telmarine, and the Telmarines was the race that cut down trees wherever they could and were at war with all wild things. And even though he himself was unlike other Telmarines, the trees couldn't be expected to know the difference, nor did they. The wind became a tempest, very strong. The woods roared and creaked all around him. There came a crash, and a tree fell right across the road just behind him. "Oh boy, quiet, Destrier, quiet," said Caspian, patting his horse's neck, but he himself was trembling, and he knew that he'd escaped death from that tree by an inch. Lightning flashed, and a great crack of thunder seemed to break the sky in two just overhead. Destrier bolted in good earnest. Caspian was a good rider, but he'd not the strength to hold him back. He kept his seat on the horse, but he knew that his life hung by a thread during the wild race that followed. Tree after tree rose up before them in the dusk and only just avoided them. Then, almost too suddenly to hurt, and yet it did hurt him too, something struck Caspian on the forehead, and he knew no more. When he finally came to himself, he was lying in a firelit place with bruised limbs and a bad headache. Low voices were speaking close at hand. "And now," said one, "before it wakes up, we must decide what to do with it." "Kill it," said another. "We can't let it live. It would betray us." "Yeah, we ought to have killed it at once, or else let it alone," said the third voice. "We can't kill it now, not after we've taken it in and bandaged its head and all. It would be a murder. It would be like murdering a guest." "Gentlemen," said Caspian in a feeble voice, "whatever you do to me, I hope you will be kind to my poor horse." "Your horse has taken flight before we found you," the first voice said, a curiously husky, earthy voice, as Caspian now noticed. "Now don't let it talk you round with its pretty words," said the second voice. "I still say horns and halibuts," exclaimed the third voice. "Of course we're not going to murder it. For shame, Narnia-Bk. What do you say, Truffle Hunter? What'll we do with it?" "Well, I will give it a drink," said the first voice, presumably Truffle Hunter's. Then a dark shape approached the bed. Caspian felt an arm slip under his shoulders gently, and if it was exactly an arm, he wasn't sure what it felt like. The shape somehow seemed wrong. The face that bent towards him seemed wrong too. He got the impression that it was very hairy and very long-nosed, and there were odd white patches on each side of it. "I think it's a mask of some sort," thought Caspian, or maybe I'm in a fever and I'm imagining it all. A cup full of something sweet and hot was set to his lips, and he drank. At that moment, one of the others poked the fire. A blaze sprang up, and Caspian almost screamed with shock at the sudden light that revealed the face looking at him into his own was not a man's face. It was a badger's face. Although it was larger and friendlier and more intelligent than the face of any badger he had ever seen before, and it certainly had been talking. He saw, too, that he was on a bed of heather. Those are plants, dried plants, in a cave. By the fire sat two little bearded men, so much wilder and shorter and hairier and thicker than Dr. Cornelius that he knew them at once for real dwarfs, ancient dwarfs with not a drop of human blood in their veins. And Caspian knew that he had found the old Narnians at last. And then his head began to swim again, and he passed out. In the next few days, he learned to know each of these creatures by name. The badger was called Truffle Hunter. He was the oldest and the kindest of the three. The dwarf who had wanted to kill Caspian was a sour black dwarf. That is, his hair and beard were black and thick and hard like horsehair. His name was Narnia-Bk. The other dwarf was a red dwarf with hair rather like a fox's, if you know what they look like, and he was called Trumpkin. "And now," said Narnia-Bk on the first evening when Caspian was well enough to sit up and talk, "we still have to decide what to do with this human. You two think you've done it a great kindness by not letting me kill it, but I suppose the upshot is that we have to keep it a prisoner for life. I'm certainly not going to let it go alive to go back to its own kind and betray us all." "Bulbs and bolsters, Narnia-Bk," said Trumpkin. "Why need you talk so unhandsomely? It isn't the creature's fault that it bashed its head against a tree outside our hole, and, well, I don't think it looks like a traitor." I say," said Caspian, you haven't yet found out whether I want to go back." "I don't. I want to stay with you if you'll let me. I've been looking for people like you all my life." "Ah, that's a likely story," growled Narnia-Bk. "You're a Telmarine and a human, aren't you? Of course you want to go back to your own kind." "Well, even if I did want to go back, I couldn't," said Caspian. "I was flying for my life when I had my accident. The king wants to kill me. If you had killed me, you had done the very thing that would please him." "Well, now," said Truffle Hunter, "you don't say so." "Eh?" said Trumpkin. "What's that? What have you been doing, humans, to fall foul of Miraz at your age?" "Well, okay, he's my uncle," began Caspian, when Narnia-Bk jumped up with his hand on his dagger. "There you are," he cried, "not only a Telmarine, but close kin and heir to our greatest enemy. Are you still mad enough to let this creature live?" And he would have stabbed Caspian then and there if the Badger and Trumpkin hadn't gotten in the way and forced him back to his seat and held him down. "Now once and for all, Knickerbrick," said Trumpkin, "will you contain yourself, or must Truffle Hunter and I sit on your head?" Well, Knickerbrick sulkily promised to behave, and the other two asked Caspian to tell his whole story. And afterwards, when he'd done so, there was a moment's silence. "Well, that is the strangest thing I've ever heard," said Trumpkin. "I don't like it," said Knickerbrick. "I didn't know there were stories about us still told among the humans. The less they know about us, the better. Now that old nurse, she'd better have held her tongue, and it's all mixed up with that tutor, a renegade dwarf. I hate him. I hate him worse than the humans. You mark my words, no good will come of this." "Don't you go talking about things you don't understand, Knickerbrick," said Truffle Hunter. "You dwarfs is as forgetful and changeable as the humans themselves. I am a beast, I am, and a badger, what's more. We don't change. We hold on. I say great good will come of this. This is the true king of Narnia we've got here, a true king, coming back to true Narnia. And we beasts remember, even if dwarfs forget, that Narnia was never right except when the son of Adam was king." "Whistles and whirligigs, Truffle Hunter," said Trumpkin. "You don't mean you want to give the country to humans?" "I said nothing about that," answered the Badger. "It's not men's country. Who should know that better than me? But it's a country for a man to be king of. We Badgers have long enough memories to know that. Why, bless us all, wasn't the High King Peter a man?" "Do you believe all those old stories?" asked Trumpkin. "I tell you, we don't change, we beasts," said Truffle Hunter. "We don't forget. I believe in the High King Peter and the rest that reigned at Cair Paravel just as firmly as I believe in Aslan himself." "As firmly as that, I dare say," said Trumpkin. "But who believes in Aslan nowadays?" "I do," said Caspian. "And if I hadn't believed in him before, I would now. Back there among the humans, the people who laughed at Aslan would have laughed at stories about talking beasts and dwarfs. Sometimes I wonder if there really was such a person as Aslan. But then sometimes I wondered if there were really people like you, yet here you are." "That's right," said Truffle Hunter. "You're right, King Caspian. As long as you will be true to old Narnia, you shall be my king. Whatever they say, long life to your majesty." "You make me sick, Badger," growled Knickerbrick. "The High King Peter and the rest may have been men, but they were a different sort of men. This is one of the cursed Telmarines. He has hunted beasts for sport. Haven't you now?" he added, rounding suddenly on Caspian. "Well, to tell you the truth, I have," said Caspian, "but they weren't talking beasts that I hunted." "It's all the same," said Knickerbrick. "No, no, no," said Truffle Hunter. "You know it isn't. You know very well that the beasts in Narnia nowadays are different. And they're no more than the poor, dumb, witless creatures you'd find in Calormen or Telmar. They're smaller, too. They're far more different from us than the half-dwarfs are from you." And after this there was a great deal more talk, but it all ended with the agreement that Caspian should stay, and even the promise that as soon as he was able to go out, he should be taken to see what Trumpkin called the others. For apparently in these wild parts all sorts of creatures from the old days of Narnia still lived on in hiding. So that's the end of Chapter 5, Caspian's Adventures in the Mountains. Chapter 6 is going to be the people that lived in hiding.